Lisa, hi. So lovely to speak to you. So, what intrigued me about the work that you do is this intersection of looking at behaviors from the point of view of neuroscience. And I understand you've got an incredible background, you've got a doctorate, you've been doing this. This is the work that you do, and you work with school districts as a whole, looking at what's with the system. And I love your system thinking. I just read a book called System Thinking, and so that's very much top of mind. To get started, Lisa, I wanted to give you some context to this conversation and then apply what you've been working with schools and districts, and then we can kind of piece apart to make it most useful and grounded to our audience. So, what we hear, one of the biggest troubles, I'll paint a picture. For example, imagine after school program, right? The children are coming from their classrooms all day. Some of them are either exhausted because they're white knuckling all day long and they're
Mhm.
having to sit in classrooms, which is not necessarily their best way of learning, right? And they have to deal with the overstimulation. So some of them are so exhausted, they've got nothing left in their tank. So those students are, exhausted, lethargic. They don't want any more demands put on them. Other children are so pent up and they have so much energy, they're hyperactive and they're explosive, and they want to run around and they're excited about the freedom. And so, for some of our yoga educators, for example, I'm saying this worst case scenario, but this can be applied to
Yeah.
all situations, whether you're teaching in the classroom, at clinic studios, at home, or wherever. But this particular kind of population or moment tends to be the hardest. So I thought we'd start there. But
Sure.
can you talk to us through for a grown up in that situation, working with a group of students, and imagine some of them probably could really benefit or are used to more active sports like soccer or football or tennis or whatever, and or even swimming, where they're having to put themselves in a yoga mindfulness club and possibly trying to find how they can be in that space and time.
Yeah.
So, could you talk to us using your background with neuroscience as it relates to biology and context? Can you talk us through how can grown-ups look at this situation differently to offer them a safe, stable, soft landing? Does that make sense?
Yep. Yep. So yeah, if we start with the idea of the science, so all behavior, two things, all behavior serves a purpose, and all behavior is the intersection of biology and context. And so when we think about the biology of behavior, I always, and I teach kids this, so I highly encourage you to teach the students this, is that our brain is like a giant company. And we think of our brain as like it's us, but the reality is there's 80% of the traffic in our brain is unconscious. So there's a whole lot of thinking going on that we don't have access to in the smart part, the thinking part, the part where our character and morals and personality live. So our biology is set up to keep us safe. And a lot of kids today, and you brought up, that they're sitting in a space that isn't really designed for the way they learn, or they've been all day just kind of hunkered down trying to control themselves. So the context currently of education is not always so friendly to the brain. And so you end up with students who are regularly feeling unsafe. Their brain is looking at the environment as an unsafe environment. When we say unsafe, we think, oh, somebody's going to come and attack us. That's not what I mean by unsafe. And so they are either intellectually not feeling safe or emotionally not feeling safe through the day. They're not having their needs met as far as movement. A lot of school classrooms are about compliance and completion as opposed to really engagement and learning. So there's a lot that I do to work with schools on that. But for your point, kids are dealing with that all day long. And then they get to your program, and what happens in their brain is that there's two departments. One I call Harold. Harold is your thalamus, and Harold is the kind of data manager of your body. And so he looks around and takes in all of the information from the environment. And he also has a conversation with Trixie. Trixie's your vagus nerve. And Trixie's job is to figure out where your body is in space. She's kind of like a systems manager. So she figures out where your body is in space. She also figures out whether your heart's beating correctly or your stomach's emptying correctly. So are you okay? So there's two problems with kids today from a biology standpoint. One is that they have terrible proprioceptive input. And and so Trixie is always agitated, not sure, which is where yoga is so powerful, right? Because it's teaching kids that mind-body connection and where your body is in space. Kids today don't play the way that we did when we were growing up, where we roll down hills and we develop that. So we already have an agitated biological system. So Harold, your data manager, is getting all this information from Trixie of like, hey, I don't really know where we are in space. There could be something dangerous. We don't know. So the stress alert's already on like level 3, right? Then things in the environment that are mildly stressful ramp that up to a full-blown fire. The What Harold does is writes up a report and he sends that report to Bob. Bob's the amygdala, he's your security guard. And so his job then is to determine, do I hit the panic button or are we safe? And so Harold and Bob play a huge role from a biological standpoint to determine kind of what our baseline is as far as our stress levels. If we are under stress, we have four different states of awake. So we have just calm, and then we have alert, we have alarm, and then fear. And so alert is actually good for us. It's like before a job interview or before a tennis match or something, you get that little jolt of juice that gets you focused. The problem with today is I see that kids go right from calm to alarm. The minute they can't do something, they don't know how to feel uncomfortable in that space. And so that's again where I think yoga and mind body and learning what your body feels like when you're stressed, learning what your body looks like when it's stressed, so that you can be proactive about calming things down. So, what I see a lot of times is students by the end of the day, Harold and Bob are in charge and they are in the unconscious part of our brain. So, when they get to your programs, you're not even speaking to the child, you're speaking to Harold and Bob. And they can't reason the way that a human can reason. Because if Bob hits that panic button, he sends a message to the thinking part of us that says, hey, go get a sandwich or a snack or something. We're in danger. Harold and I'll take care of it and we'll call you back in when you're safe. So you see all this outlandish behavior because Harold and Bob are running the show. So that's that biology piece. The context piece is really important because not only do we have 8 hours a day that isn't really built for student learning, so we have intellectually unsafe classrooms, sometimes emotionally unsafe spaces, but we also have a world that we're growing up in that is very negative. I grew up with like Little House on the Prairie and Saved by the Bell and shows that were like really wholesome and about family and about owning your mistakes and saying you're sorry and people in your community cared about you. Our children are growing up with like the housewives of name whatever city or vote people off the island. They're growing up with a worldview of othering, of power, of manipulation, and it's impacting from a biological standpoint, it's impacting Harold because Harold has these filters that he uses to understand what's happening around him. So he's looking at all of the environment and he goes into our unconscious memories and our sensory associations and he says, okay, what do I know about the world? How can I make this situation similar to something from the past? Because if every situation was novel, our head would explode. So we need to have patterns and similarities. Well, our kids today are pulling up multiple filters that are negative, that people aren't to be trusted, or the world is dangerous and scary, or I'm not worthwhile, or whatever those filters are. So if you think of reality like a banana, that banana comes in, Harold puts up all these filters. We shove the banana through the filters, while on the other side, it doesn't look like a banana anymore. And so it's the perception and the reality are not always even aligned at all. And that's really important to understand as somebody who's working with kids because when they walk in that program, if whatever is going on in the context, if you've got kids that are, acting out or super stressed or being able to look at them and say, okay, this has something to do with Harold and Bob. Something in this environment is being associated with something that makes our body stressed or makes us feel bad or has called up certain beliefs we have about ourselves. So instead of having that conflict between you and me, the kid and the adult, it's really more like I'm going to look at you like a puzzle to be solved. What's going on in this environment that I can change, that I can help you recognize so you can change so that we can calm that body down. And when I teach kids about Harold and Bob and Trixie, then when they are having a moment, instead of being like, Giselle, what's wrong with you? Or what's happening to you today? Where then now you have shame and guilt. I can say, hey, what's Harold telling you? Or Bob seems really agitated today. Can I help you help Bob? Because you're the leader of your brain. And if Harold and Bob are taking over, then you need to be the leader and tell them what you want. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. And I was thinking about, so we're big fans over here of, Mona Delahooke, Beyond Behaviors, which is exactly what you're talking about, is under the surface. And then what I'm hearing too is, the whole brain to name it, tame it. And then the explosive child by Ross
Yep.
Greene talking about speaking to them and collaborative problem
Yep.
solving. But I wonder too if there's even a step before that is looking after us as grown-ups, because what I'm hearing is what we're thinking about the child, but often it's the grown up we have our own filter of I'm
Yep.
also exhausted, underpaid, overworked. I've got
Yep.
all these other personal things going on, where a lot of us are teaching and we're in that in between of looking at, we have children plus looking after elderly parents. So
Yep.
now how do we as grown-ups have this mindset shift so we're even able to think about Harold and Trixie and Bob?
Yeah. Well, and you know what? That is so important because I've never seen a dysregulated adult have a group of children that are doing great. So we really do set the tone and the feel and the climate of whatever context we're in. So one of the things that I talk about is creating your own self-care routine. And I think people think of emotional and wellness type stuff as like it's changing, but it used to be like hippie hooey. Like even yoga is so much more mainstream now, but it used to be like, oh, you do yoga? Like that's really like out there kind of thing. But now when you connect the science to it, like these things make sense because we're calming down that vagus nerve. We're creating that mind body thing. We're learning how to breathe. So one of the things that I encourage all adults to do is when to start a self-care routine by setting a timer in your phone. Set the timer in your phone for 30 minutes. Every 30 minutes, no matter what you're doing, unless you're in something like driving and you can't stop, but like every 30 minutes, when that timer goes off, take a couple deep breaths. Stand up, maybe stretch, look out a window, stare at a leaf blowing in the wind. Just take 2 minutes, not even two, 90 seconds, right? And just spend a minute. Feel your feet on the floor, feel your hands. Do some like just pinch your fingers so you feel them and notice them. And then go back to work. And then 30 minutes later, it goes off and you do it again. And what happens is after a couple weeks of kind of regularly getting into that routine, your body will naturally relax every
Mm.
30 minutes. You'll just find that you're not even thinking about it. Your body just starts to crave a deep breath. So that keeps us at a little bit more of an even keel. The other thing that I think we can do proactively, if we know the kids that we're working with, behavior always serves a purpose. It's either, I don't want to do this, I'm going to avoid it, so I'm going to get us off track so that we don't have to do it. It's, I want attention. It's, I want power. It might be, I don't believe I can do this, so now this is playing into a negative self-talk. So if you look at kids and instead of thinking of them as a problem, think of them as a puzzle and think about, okay, I know that this group of kids, I have a lot of kids who are attention seekers. So, what routines am I going to set up proactively to give them the attention? And, when I used to teach,
Mhm.
if I had a kid who was an attention seeker, a lot of times if they're not acting up, you kind of like, you don't want to poke the bear. So you sort of leave them alone when they're not acting up. And that's the exact opposite of what they need. They need attention, and that need grows, and eventually they explode because they're not getting it in a positive, proactive way. The other thing I would say in your particular situation is to think about that transition. People need a minute to transition from one context to the next. So one thing that I always encourage teachers to do and even parents to do, and you could do this as well, is teach the kids fizzy and flat. So fizzy and flat, you take them outside with a can of soda, you shake the soda up, you open it up, it blows. And you say, look, we're all like a can of soda and we're fizzy, but I can't see inside your can. So if you're feeling really fizzy or if you're feeling just flat with no fizz at all, that tastes gross. We want it to be just right. So when you come into the program, you self-report to me, am I fizzy? And if the child just walks in and says fizzy, we can give them a little grace and space before we try to get them moving into something. And that can have a huge impact on just relationship building to be able to say, hey, this person cares about me and I have a right to not feel okay and to say I don't feel okay and they're going to do what I need them to do. The other thing I would say is plan for that transition. So if you know you've got some kids who need to get energy out and you have some kids that just need to breathe and decompress, maybe have the first 5 minutes of your program when you walk in, create a routine with some stations where kids can
Mm.
go to those stations and self-select what they need to do and have a timer up on the smart board or wherever, have some type of visible timer where you say, okay, we have 5 minutes for transition and then we're going to get started, and giving the kids the flexibility and freedom to choose what they need to calm that body down. And they see the timer so they know when it's time, and then they transition and now you start when everybody's ready. So those are some things that might be helpful to sort of tamp down on some of the crazy behaviors that are coming because of the context that they haven't transitioned out of yet.
Yeah, beautiful. I want to loop back. So, highlighting what you said there about the calm, and you're saying every half an hour, hour and a half, or whatever. And that is so amazing. I love what you're talking about. These micro moments throughout the day. So you're keeping your vibration high because
Yep.
often what happens is we might do some, a little practice in the morning and then not until the afternoon. Whereas if we're doing these micro moments, it's keeping our vibration high, right? Our
Yep.
energy high. And I love that all of those can be done with your students. So as
Yeah,
educators, one of the
modeling.
biggest things that we say is, "Oh, we don't have time," right? We absolutely do. It's almost like as you said, this is not a luxury anymore. It's a must-have,
Hmm.
and having the students, these are lifelong skills these students are creating. Imagine if they could be going away in whatever situation they're in outside of your classroom, that they could take a little deep breath, even
Yeah.
on the soccer field or when they're, with their sibling or whatever that is. So think about this as a must-have. This is about being human in this crazy, busy world. And these are skills that we're giving them. So I want to mention that to highlight what you said about those micro moments. And then also that piece about this is great about the transition. I love that the fizzy and the flat. And what I'm hearing from you is creating that structure. So making it, understanding the context of what you're dealing with, right? And then the curiosity piece of, this isn't an overnight fix. This isn't a one size fits all. These are not like this, try this activity is going to work for everyone. But it's that what
Right.
I'm hearing from you is the curiosity in the context and biology. What do you think from that perspective? You may not capture that child the first day or the second day or the third day. But if we just keep being open, we keep raising our own vibe, we keep being open and flexible, right, to
Hmm.
the situation at hand, and we keep thinking about the as Ross Green says, kids do well if they can, right? So it's
Yep.
not personal. It is so easy to take this personally, isn't
Yep.
it?
Yep.
And think, oh, they're behaving because of me, or I'm not a good teacher, or someone's going to walk by and see me, or a parent's going to see me, right? And so we do have to put our ego at the door in some places in our sensitivities of like, okay, this is a puzzle, as you said. This is
Yes.
a puzzle for us to, how can we transform this environment? Because
Yeah.
truly, that space that you create could be the best thing that happens to them in elementary school, for example. You
Right.
know.
And the thing, I think that's where it's so important that we are emotionally regulated,
Mhm.
because if we are creating this space, in order for us to not take it personally, because we have a Harold and Bob and Trixie too. And
Mm.
so when a kid comes in and starts being combative with us, if we let Harold and Bob take over, they're going to go in survival mode, and that's about winning. That's about I win, you lose. It's not about compromise. And so it's so important that we keep our system regulated. And I think, the other thing when you were talking about kind of keeping your vibrations high, one practice I do every day, and this is again something you could do with kids, is in the morning before I get out of bed, I just stay in bed for just like a minute. It's honestly, this doesn't take long. It's like a minute, and I keep my eyes closed. And for me, it's the beach. That's like my Zen
Mm.
place. The sounds, the smells, everything about the beach makes me happy. And I close my eyes and I visualize my favorite beach, and I just take some breaths and I feel my body relax and I feel joy. And it's like a lot of people know what it feels like to be mad, but they don't know what it feels like to be happy. And so even there's an exercise I do with kids called name it, own it, control it. And we start by, what does your body feel like when you're angry or stressed or upset? And going through and really identifying those feelings, because sometimes we can't put in vocabulary. We don't have the vocabulary to describe our emotions, but I know if my stomach's sick or I know if my throat's tight. And so we kind of go through that and then we talk about like what are the things you can do to calm that body down and what can I do and what shouldn't I do to help you. So it becomes kind of a social contract. But then also doing that with joy. What does joy feel like? And then, having people like plan for happy, plan for joy. And, there was a social science experiment that they did. It was a basketball team, and two teams, and the subjects had to count how many times the basketball was passed among like the white shirt team and the black shirt team. So when the experiment was over, they said, okay, how many times did the basketball get passed? And they would respond, and then they'd say, did you see the giant gorilla that walked through the court? And people, over 50% of the people did not see a giant life-size hairy gorilla walk across because Harold is programmed to see what we expect to see. And so if
Mhm.
we wake up every day and we start with joy, then Harold is primed to see joy. But if we wake up every day thinking, ugh, today's going to be terrible, then it will be. And so there's all these beautiful gorillas around us that kids don't even notice. So even having as part of the transition some positivity prompts like, hey, tell me two good things that happened today. Tell me one thing you love about yourself that other people might not know. Tell me one thing you're proud of. Tell me one kind thing you did for somebody else. And if they know, and again, it becomes really important that these are routines. It's not just a one-off and it's not done for in a reactive way when a kid's triggered by something. It's done as part of your routine. And when you set up your space in a way that your context is an understanding context, knows what I need to get myself back down to baseline, promotes positivity, promotes pride, promotes belonging and connection. Now you've created a context where you're going to have fewer of those behaviors because everybody's going to be, Harold and Bob are going to be calm and say, this is a safe place for you. So,
Mm.
enjoy it.
Right. And I love this combination you're talking about is mind, body, spirit. Specifically,
Hmm.
because the people often say, oh, taking a deep breath won't work. And I get that, right? There's not within the yoga world, but some other folks. So I get that. And to be paired with the positive thinking as well. So it's understand the context, understand the science of what happens when you can take a deep breath, extend your exhale, your vagus nerve and all of it, right? And so I love that. And then the micro moments or this vibrational breaks really helps the hygiene. It's almost like energy hygiene, right? So
Yeah.
I love those the combination of those three. I love what you said here. I saw on your website it says change doesn't happen to us. We make changes. When we learn to think differently, we teach and lead differently. And that remind me of the quote by Maya Angelou: "When you know better, do better." And so I
Yep.
think that that's the beauty of the brain science. When we read all these books and what you're offering, from scientists, social scientists, what you're offering, the bridge. Okay, great. Here's the science, but how do we bring this now to schools? And
Yep.
look, let's be frank. The education system in the United States, I think we can all agree is broken. Not
Uh-huh.
completely, but there's a lot of pieces of the
Yep.
system that is not
Yep.
working, right? And if we compare it to somewhere like Finland, for example, a lot of research around it's the opposite of how we approach it here in the United States, right? It's more child first. There's a lot of money in it. The teachers are paid well. It's a community organization. Every child has an IEP, quote, 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 because they don't, every child is helped to their potential, right? And so it's very easy in this country to think, oh my gosh, like where do I start? How do I even begin? But I think what you're offering is this perspective of like everything we do matters. And if we can bring brain science into it and bring our wellness practices together and look at the system, what can we control?
Right. And that's
Right?
where, so what I propose, I call it a NeuroWell culture. And,
Mm.
neuro wellness isn't another thing to do. It's not a separate initiative. It's truly a pair of glasses that you put
Mhm.
on and you see the world through that lens. And it's a safe, supportive, proactive type lens. And I think part of the problem we have in schools is that they aren't fundamentally changing the way they do business. So they're having more and more problems pop up that they're trying to react to. And it's exhausting and it's inefficient and it's not good for anybody. And it's burning out teachers and it's, really causing problems for kids as well. So what I propose is like the proactive system. This is good for everybody. And this should be part of what we do. And, you mentioned Finland, which is interesting. I worked for a organization many years back, and we did a tour around the world of different countries that were very high performing. And Finland was one of them. And the minister of education in Finland said to the people who were from the company, you would never be able to replicate Finland, our education structure in the United States. And the team said, well, why not? And he said, because we have a fundamental difference. We believe that every Finn is valuable, and our job is to help every Finn fulfill his or her potential so that they can contribute to our society in their way. You don't believe that about your Americans. And it was really a sad but true kind of state of affairs. And I argue also in NeuroWell, I argue that our purpose has shifted. When one of the worst things we ever did in education was connect student outcome with teacher quality. Because now all of a sudden, in the past, teachers would say, I teach kids. Now, high stakes
Mhm.
test and the data is about them, they say, I teach content. So when you
Mhm.
ask teachers what they teach, if they don't just teach a grade level and you ask them what they teach, they'll respond with content, not with kids. And when the system shifted that way, now all of a sudden, if I have a kid who's a complicated order, he's no longer a puzzle to be solved. He's a problem to be managed. And that's what we see in schools. And it's very sad. And so my whole life's work and what I'm so passionate about is helping to shift that system, put those glasses on because everybody is happier, healthier, and more successful when they're looking at that connection between biology and context and then being proactive to set up a climate and culture that is good for everybody and good for the brain and good for the body. Your dividends pay, astronomically better than another intervention program for math.
Yeah, that reminds me. I just read this book called Hidden Potential. Have you heard of this book, Hidden Potential by Adam Grant? And there's a
No.
whole, it's about the science of achieving greater things.
Yeah.
But he talks about in here, he's a social scientist as well, but he's a whole chapter about Finland. And he was given an example of a principal in Finland who goes into a kindergarten and works with that kindergarten, like you said, specific. So from
Yep.
that filter of every child matters and every child has
Yep.
ability to reach their own potential, there's a principal going to work one to one with a kindergarten teacher. And as you say,
Yep.
it's a complete shift. So I guess, for those of us here, the reality is this is a system we work in, right? And now what's the how? How do
Right.
we make change, right? In the reality that we live.
Yeah.
And I love that perspective, new glasses of okay, what can I control myself first and foremost? How do I
Yes.
look after myself in terms of my mind, body, spirit? How do I do the best, focus on what matters, while also living up to the expectations of, for the example of the after school program,
Right.
expectations of parents, right?
Yep.
Expectations of the school in which we might be working at or whatever, filling the classes and all those kinds of things, as well as teachers who are bringing yoga into their classrooms.
Yeah.
They have to still, educational standards, the administration, the
Yep.
content and everything.
Yep.
But I guess we could see the flip side of that. We don't, again, children don't learn unless they're regulated. And
Right.
it's right. And so I'm sure you see this as well in classrooms where if the content is the only thing that matters, when we step back and we look at, is that interesting or not? And then we
Right.
look at the context. For example, I work as a teacher substitute still, and I used to be a teacher. But, my role was to put on this, whatever topic we were doing, and I had to play a video. Well, I thought to myself, I am bored. Of course
Right.
the children are acting up because this content is
Yes,
terrible. And so the biology for the children, they're sitting here in the dark. It's spring. They want to be outside. So I think about that moment. I was like, okay, time out. We're turning this off. Like
right.
they're not learning anyway,
Ex
right?
exactly. That's the
So,
whole thing is what we're doing isn't working. And so why are we so tied to doing it that way?
mm,
It doesn't make any sense. And I preach that there are three things that we need to be happy, healthy, and successful. The first is self-awareness. And so to me, like teaching how the brain works, teaching, understanding yourself, understanding what Harold's filters are, understanding what kind of monitor Bob is. Is he going to be crazy about something or is he going to be really relaxed about things? Understanding yourself and I feel like understanding the way your body, we don't teach people how their body works, which is insane. So that's the first. The second is that self-regulation. Once you understand how it works, now you can regulate it. And when you have those two, now you have self-control. And when you have self-control, what that means is that the you part of your brain that makes you you and makes decisions and gets to choose how to be happy and how to lead your life and have friends, that person in your brain, that part of your brain is in control. And so that self-awareness, self-regulation, and self-control. And I think that in a post-AI world, this whole kind of purpose of school as content transmission, it's antiquated. And even the purpose of
mhm.
school as career readiness or, career pathways, who can tell anybody what the pathway is going to be? Like everything is being disrupted. So to me, the real purpose of a modern school in a post-AI world is to teach you to be human. It's to develop that part of your brain, that front part of your brain. But when I go into schools, they all talk about it, but they don't have the strategy and scope and sequence and the real intentionality in building the thinking and the emotional regulation and the self-awareness and metacognitive skills. And those are the skills that are the gap that humans are going to fill in a world that's going to be increasingly automated.
Right. And luckily, yoga and mindfulness fits right into that
Right
slot.
into it.
Yes.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, I
Can
would
you
love to
tell us,
see more of that.
yeah, can you give us an example of maybe a classroom or a district where you've taught people to use this NeuroWell filter?
Yeah, so I have done this in lots of schools. I teach them to use learning sprints. And so the learning sprints are, and this is what's easy for teachers because I'm like, you don't have to change anything that you do, right? So if they have boring curriculum, they still have boring curriculum. However,
Yeah.
as a step one, break up your day. So if you have, say you have an hour and a half block with kids, then you say, okay, during this hour and a half, we're going to do 6 learning sprints. And this one's 12 minutes long. And you put the timer up and they can see the timer. And you say, we're going to do this for 12 minutes. And then at the end of that 12 minutes, you take a brain break. And that brain break can be a turn to your neighbor and tell them something good that happened today. It could be a stand up and stretch. It could be a vagal nerve exercise. It could be independent. It could be group. It could be anything. But it breaks up that. And then you go back to, okay, now we've had our break. Now we're going to do another learning sprint for 8 minutes, and you can
Mm.
vary the lengths of them. Super powerful from an executive function development. It teaches kids how long 8 minutes is, teaches them what they can do if they focus that long, teaches them to
Mm.
transition their focus, and it builds in that automatic regulation that they can do throughout the day so that that behavior doesn't ramp up. And I did this with actually a program for incarcerated teenagers, and a lot of the curriculum was being delivered on the computer. We started learning sprints, and their productivity on their learning platform went up 30% within a month. And so we are aligning our practices with how the brain works. And lo and behold, we have better successes and we have fewer discipline problems.
So, Lisa, if you had a magic wand, wh what would be the one thing that educators, yoga teachers, parents could take away that they could do right now to make a
I would
difference?
say that the biggest thing I would say is we have ultimate control over our context. So if
Mm.
we understand the biology and we create a safe, supportive, positive context, then we have so much influence, not only on trying to keep behaviors. It's not about, like complying
Mhm.
so you don't have bad behavior, but actually empowering our kids and ourselves to have that self-control. So if I had a magic wand, everyone would understand the basics about the biology of behavior and perceptions, and they would be actively working to develop a positive context.
I think that speaks to a lot of our population right now who have, have been diagnosed on the spectrum with autism or ADHD. Some of this population, and I've read tons of work around this. Context is really important, right? And so you might have a neurodiverse brain. However, it can make a difference in a lot of ways if we're helping to see the context in which this child, this population is working from on what their
Right,
demands. And so I'm not
right.
saying that we have to all go work on a farm necessarily, although that would be amazing. But
Yeah,
like you said, the reality is a lot of children are in public schools here. They might be in private, but a lot are in public, and they are working in large classrooms. And so I think, even within that, like what can we do to offer the context of the situation so that they can succeed?
right. And I think the key is we have to have a safe context. And we think of safety through physical safety, but we have to think about emotional safety, which comes from self-awareness and self-regulation, right? Because if I don't feel like I can control my own emotions, then I'm not emotionally safe. And so I'm
Mm.
carrying that context around with me in every single context I'm in because I don't have that self-control. And the second thing is, or the third type of safety is intellectual safety. And this is something else that I see a lot is that kids are in schools, it's a one size fits all. They might
Yeah.
be neurodivergent, they might learn differently, or they might just be behind in a particular academic area. And they come into a classroom and they're like, I can't do this. I don't know what I'm doing. I can't. And then, with students who are there's a lot of conversations right now about neurodivergent kids. And, it's interesting because we do have about 11% of the population has ADHD. We have a lot of kids that are diagnosed on the spectrum somewhere, but we also have a huge swath of kids, like most of them, who are delayed in their executive function development.
Mm.
And executive function development, if you've got delays in that, it looks like ADHD. And it's
Mm.
not, but it looks the same because it's similar, because ADHD has executive function characteristics. So I think, what I try to tell teachers is this is a everybody situation. This isn't an intervention situation. This is a tier one. This is how we do business here. This is how we set up our classroom. And again, it's about routine and thoughtfulness and intentionality. It's not difficult to do. None of the stuff that you do is difficult. It just has to be intentional and repeated so that it becomes part of a routine and becomes automatic.
I love it. And it's in that routine and structure where the brain is actually happy,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Absolutely. So coming back to that after school program, right? When you have our neurodiverse and, executive, all of that, right? This population, then it offers a chance to create a plan as yoga teachers, right? We have a plan, but also the flexibility and freedom. We have the structure, the main structure routine, but within that plan, to offer children some space and freedom. And if
Yeah.
you, like what you were saying before, if we come from the point of view of the child versus the content,
Yeah.
what does that look like? So instead of the content trying to get through da 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 da, we have all these things we have to get done today,
Yeah.
versus what does that child need, or what do the children need right
Yeah.
now, right? Because I think about one of our dear community members, Sammy. She'll often say, she's got young children after school and they're bouncing around and all of it. They do their, like, initially when she first meets them, so she lets them get their wiggles out and they do a dance or whatever. And then some children sleep for the
Yeah.
rest of the yoga class. And oftentimes yoga educators will say, well, I don't know what to do. The child is disruptive or not participating or whatever. But she says, from that brain science, it actually works. If a child needs to sleep after
Right.
school, let them sleep, right?
Right.
And she's so
Right.
good about it. She said, I just let them sleep, and that's what they need. Like, what
Yep.
do they need now,
Yeah.
right? And that's a
One-
much different perspective of content first.
Yes, exactly. And I think that is a critical key is that take a step outside of the content and say, what is my purpose?
Mm.
Why am I doing this? What is the benefit to the kids? So part of the benefit is they'll learn some yoga, right? So that's going to be a good benefit. But let's go a step beyond and not say today we have to learn how to do box breathing or today we have to learn a certain move, and
Yeah.
instead really say, what is the benefit, through the lens of like self-awareness, self-regulation. And now all of a sudden, if a kid needs to sleep, that's not a problem. That's what that kid needs today. And then let's have some conversations about, why do you need to sleep so much? Are you not getting to bed at night? Are you playing games at night? How can we create healthier habits for you so that you're ready to, be here in this experience?
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much. It was such great words of wisdom. Any parting words while we,
No, just any educator. I mean, I've been a teacher, I've been an administrator. I get it. I understand how difficult it is in that context. I used to work with 21st century after school programs, so I understand that context. And if people, want to continue the conversation, I'm on LinkedIn. Just look up Lisa Riegel on LinkedIn and connect with me. And I would love to continue the conversation. Or if there are questions or people need additional ideas, just have them reach out.
awesome. And I think you've got a book that you just published maybe last year.
Yep. So I have a book called NeuroWell. It goes through kind of the context, the reasons that our brain is different today than it was maybe in my generation. There's a deep dive into the biology, and then there's a chapter really on NeuroWell context, what that looks like, and then there's a chapter on how to improve that in your home as well. So it's for
Great.
educators and parents, and it's super practical. It will go through, it's not theoretical. It gives you some of the science, but it gives you like, so try this. Step one, do this. Step two, try this. And so hopefully people, it gives them what they need to not only put the glasses on and see their context differently, but also some of the actionable items they can do.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Lisa. I so appreciate you. Thanks for joining
Yeah.
us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you.